Hello everyone, and welcome to the first video on the Highlane account. So I've been waiting anxiously for any Zelda news lately so I could start uploading on this channel to talk and discuss it. But, as you all know, there hasn't been any news from Nintendo in a long time. So I figured a good way to pass the time while we wait for any sort of an update from them is to do a video where I talk about my hopes for the sequel to Breath of the Wild, commonly known by the fans as Breath of the Wild 2. So that's what I'll be doing today. Let's get right into it. I'm sure you all know it has almost been a year since we saw the reveal of the sequel to Breath of the Wild, which is honestly crazy to me. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was probably my favorite E3 memory ever. But since then, I've been able to do a lot of thinking and a lot of revising to this list of things that I want to see in the sequel. So a big part of the trailer was this guy right here, Ganondorf. Or we're all pretty sure that's him. And that is my first hope. So I don't just hope that he's in the game, because obviously it would seem like he is. I hope that he has a good story and personality. So I don't want him to just remain the undead version of Ganon. I think it would be the right decision to have him somehow be fully revived, so we'll like see what he was like before he was in that mummified, dead skeletal state. But I do think that if Nintendo kept him in the skeletal state and like the malice corrupted him, I think if they did that but he still had a personality, like he wasn't just evil from the malice, I think that could be done right as well. But I would definitely prefer if he was revived. And basically what I want them to do with this is give us a reason to want to defeat him. Like, let us know why he is going to be doing what he's doing. And we don't even know what he's going to do. I think he's going to take over parts of Hyrule, and that's why we'll have to be exploring it again as Link and Zelda. So that was my first hope. I want a more fleshed out Ganon with a good story and personality. I want us to learn how he got there, what happened to him, and most importantly, why we need to stop him. And that's something I'm really excited for. That was one of the things I did not like about Breath of the Wild, which one of the few things I didn't like about it was that there was no Ganondorf. But now we have him. So let's move on to my second hope. My second hope for Breath of the Wild 2 is that we'll see the return of classic items. Now, when you think of classic items, and specifically ones that weren't in Breath of the Wild, what do you think? You think of the hookshot. If you're me, and probably a lot of other fans, to me it was very weird that it was absent in Breath of the Wild, because with a game that is so focused on exploration and traversing the wild, it doesn't really make sense that we don't have the hookshot, an item which could be used to quickly and efficiently get up mountains. Or say there is a big cliff and there's like a tree branch sticking out of it that you can latch onto the hookshot. What if you latched onto it and it pulls you forward with a lot of force, and then you pull out the paraglider and it sends you flying very fast? I think there's a lot of ways that the hookshot could be used, and to be honest, I just miss it. I want to see it again in the sequel, and I hope we do. But other than the hookshot, there's plenty of other classic items. Like, in most Zelda games, there's some sort of a musical instrument, like the Ocarina of Time, there's the Goddess Harp and Skyward Sword. There's usually always some sort of musical instrument in Zelda games. You got the Wind Waker and stuff, but Breath of the Wild didn't have one. So I think it would be cool if that made a return somehow, some way. It doesn't really have to be important to the story, but if there was, say, like an ocarina item you could find, and maybe it could also be used to call your horse. I think there's I think we need to see some nod to instruments in Breath of the Wild or the sequel. But now we can move on from that and talk about my third hope. My third hope kinda connects to my first, where I want a more complex story. Breath of the Wild did not have a bad story, but it was one that took place almost entirely in the past until the very end. And it was an interesting one, but what I want to see them do in the sequel is I think it will obviously have to take place in real time, but I want it to be complex. I want Link and Zelda to have more of a reason to want to stop Ganondorf. I think it would be really cool if there was like some sort of threat that we knew was coming that we had to stop quickly, like with Breath of the Wild. Even though Calamity Ganon could have attacked at any time, the player could really control that by deciding when they wanted to go to Hyrule Castle, so there was no real reason to hurry up. But that is a good thing in where you can explore for however long you want. But I think it would be cool if there was parts of the story where it was very free in the sequel, and then other parts where you felt like you wanted to move it forward very fast. So I just want a more complex story with maybe some twists and other things like that. I think that would be something that Breath of the Wild's Hyrule really needs, since it was absent in the first game. But yeah, that's basically the third hope. Just an overall better story, which is something that I think everyone wants, but I definitely think it's something that we need. There's a lot to learn about with Ganondorf and plenty of other things. But now we'll move on to my fourth hope. So the fourth hope is that there will be a new important character. So other than Link, Zelda, and Ganondorf, the classic three that make up the Triforce, I think that there should be more important characters. So obviously now that all of the champions other than Link and Zelda are dead, and I think we're going to need to see some new important characters or character. So I'm not quite sure if we'll be banding together with like the descendants of the champions, or if they'll do like a completely new character. You know, we got like Yunobo and stuff. If they were to band together with the descendants of the champions, I think that would be pretty cool. But I feel like that type with like all of the races coming together was kind of already done in the first game, so I think it would be cool if there was another sort of like best friend character, someone that Link and Zelda could grow to trust, and that character, maybe something happens to them, maybe they die or something, and it really affects you as the player to push the story forward. So yeah, that's what I think. I think we need a new important character, maybe kind of like Groose was in Skyward Sword, where he was with you for part of the adventure. My fifth hope is that Zelda will accompany Link. So you might have noticed every time I talk about Link in this list, I say and Zelda, because I do truly believe that since the whole point of Breath of the Wild was to break conventions, I think that we'll see Zelda accompanying Link in the sequel. And that's something that a lot of people want, but I think you might still play as Link, but Zelda will follow you around as backup, and maybe you get to play as her in some spots in dungeons or something, but that's definitely something I want. I think they need to step away from the Zelda needs to be saved at the end type of thing that they've done. I think it's time to have her join us and play a more important role. Her powers, her golden power, which they call it in Breath of the Wild, which is basically the Triforce, or at least her part of it, I think that would be an interesting way to have her support Link. And that could also potentially give us some sort of local multiplayer. It depends on how they do it, if it would be good or not, but I do think if they were going to implement local multiplayer, they would use Zelda. I think it's time we see her take up more of an important role. And that's all for that hope. So the next thing I want to see, my sixth hope, is that we'll be able to see the rebuilding efforts. So in the true ending to Breath of the Wild, you see Link and Zelda at the end, and Zelda basically says if they work together, she believes that Hyrule can be restored to its former glory. So I think we should be able to see some of that. We obviously don't know the amount of time between Breath of the Wild 1 and the sequel, but judging by the fact that all of the towers are missing, and shrines, and divine beasts, I think it's been a fair amount of time, at least a year or a few. So in that amount of time, they should have been able to restore some more towns and maybe even Castletown. And I think that's something important. I think we need to be able to visit these towns and maybe see why Ganondorf, like why it's important, why we need to protect these towns from Ganondorf. And that's one of the things that I think is really important. We need to see the rebuilding efforts. So hopefully it's Castletown, because in the memories of the first game, that looked so cool back before it was destroyed. But that's all for the 6th hope. Moving on to the 7th hope is that I want the Yiga and Zonai to be explained further. So I put them together since if I had them separately would be kind of the thing. I just want to see more of them, especially the Zonai, since we only got to see what's left of them in the rubble that's left behind of their ruins. I think there's a lot of interesting lore with the Zonai. A lot of people seem to think that they are the cause of the Green Hand, which we can see here in the sequel trailer. So I think there's a lot to be talked about with them. Are they important? Were they just another savage branch of Hylians? We don't really know. So I think it's important that we hear more about them. And as for the Yiga, well, they were really cool in Breath of the Wild, and they were our banana-loving enemies and defectors of the Sheikah. I don't think we saw enough of them. You know, we saw Master Koga. He was probably my favorite, as everyone else's, and he gets thrown into the hole, and that's all we see of him. That hole might be important in the next one, but yeah, that's all for the 7th hope. I hope that we see more of the Zonai and the Yiga. Moving on to my 8th hope. My 8th hope is that we will see a new world, whether that be through time travel, potentially Ganon creates some sort of calamity world or calamity parts of the world that are completely affected and changed completely by malice, or perhaps even the underground, which you know, of course, we see some of in the sequel trailer. As long as the underground is big enough and takes up quite a large amount of Hyrule, I think that will fit the category for a new world. So I just think that's something that we need going into a sequel. I think somehow they're going to need to change up the Hyrule that we know and love from Breath of the Wild quite drastically, and I think the easiest way to do that is to add on to that or add an entirely different world. So I think the Calamity World would be pretty cool. Maybe the Calamity World is time travel. Maybe we go back in time and we see the fight from 10,000 years ago. I don't know. I don't think that's the one I'd prefer. I think I would like the underground, or, you know, just a Calamity World itself. Somehow maybe Ganondorf creates one and we have to go in there. Either way, I think we need to see a new version of Hyrule to keep things fresh. And that's all for my 8th hope. So now moving on to my 9th hope. I want to see classic bosses return, along with dungeons. I didn't just want to be basic. We know everyone wants dungeons back in the sequel, so I wanted to do something that kind of goes along with that and is a little unique. So that is the return of some classic bosses. So Stone Talus, Moldiga, all of the bosses in Breath of the Wild were awesome, but all of the main dungeon Divine Beast bosses were basically the same. They were all Blight Ganons. And while those were cool, I don't think we needed 4 of them. So in order to keep bosses feeling fresh and to have players have a bit of nostalgia with them, I think it would be awesome to see classic bosses return, such as Goma, or some sort of King Dodongo. Any sort of classic Zelda boss would be really cool, but I'd also be fine if they just did bosses that weren't just the same, infected by the Calamity Ganon's malice, as long as it's some sort of different boss, like maybe some sort of creature that just was naturally there in the underground or something, and it's just an evil creature. It's not corrupted by malice, it's just a boss. I think that'd be interesting. I think we need to see some more boss variety. Like, I did like the Blights, but I was a little disappointed in the fact that that was all we got, so I think we definitely need to see the return of some more classic style bosses. And that's all for number 9. Moving on to the 10th and final hope. There might be an extra, I don't know, you'll see. But anyways, the 10th and final hope is that we see the underwater fully implemented. So one of the most interesting things to me about Breath of the Wild is that, look at this picture on screen now. As you can see, the game has a fully modeled underwater here. You can see coral, you can see other forms of life, you can see fish and stuff. You can't even see that unless you use a glitch. I don't know why, but I feel like at one point in time, probably very close to release, they wanted to do some sort of diving or something with the water, but for some reason that was canceled. Another thing that supports this is in creating a champion. I think there was a early design for an underwater divine beast. So I think we were initially supposed to have underwater exploration, but for some reason that got cut. I think we definitely need to see that return, but fully implemented in the sequel. I think that'll be awesome. Have some sort of way to dive and swim. An underwater dungeon is probably going to happen, which makes me really happy. We all hate the water temple, but we also love it just as much as we hate it. So that was the final hope. Now before I end this, I do have one more thing. I don't really consider this one a hope, it's just something I think that would be cool. It's not really something I even want. I just think it's something that would be interesting to see in the game, if that makes sense. And that's the curse, the original curse put on the descendants of Link and the spirit of Goddess Hylia by Demise. I think we should see that discussed, potentially. If this were to happen, I think it would be cool to have the curse discussed and maybe mentions of past heroes, even though by this point in time in the timeline, past heroes have been faded into legend, which is really cool. I think there may be some maybe the Zonai kept the memory of the past Links alive. I think it would be really cool if they just got mentioned more, and along with all of that stuff, I think it would be cool to see the Triforce mentioned more since it was just absent in the first game. I kind of separated this from the rest of the list because I don't know if this is going to happen. I don't know if it would make the game better or worse. I just think it's a cool little addition that we could see. I think it'd be awesome to hear more about the curse. Potentially, like a lot of people have theorized, maybe this game will break the curse. I don't know if that's the case, because that would mean the end of the Zelda timeline. They could of course make new titles and just put it before the sequel to Breath of the Wild, but I don't know if they'd want to do that, especially if they mention past Links, because they can only mention past Links up to all the ones that we've seen in all the games that we've had up until now, 2020. So if they were to add more, they obviously wouldn't be able to add them. There's probably some sort of thing they could do with timelines to get around that, but either way, I think that would be interesting. But yeah, that's it for my hopes. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this as a first video on the channel. So I hope you'll consider liking and subscribing for more content. As soon as there's some more Zelda news, I will be making a video on it. Comment down below. What are your hopes for Breath of the Wild? Do you agree with any of mine? Do you disagree? Be sure to let me know. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for watching.